In the first film of this trilogy, we explored the background to the migration of 9 Cornishmen to Mexico under contract to the Real del Monte Mining Company in 1824, using the diary of one of those men travelling with them from Liverpool via New York to Tampico. In the second film, we trace their epic journey inland to Real del Monte, where the party was warmly greeted by the pealing of church bells. Join me in this final film to find out what greeted those men on their arrival at the mines, attempt to discover their fate, and to explore the legacy they laid, which led to the establishment of the first Cornish community in Latin America. Today, the Real del Monte Pachuca area is known as Mexico's Little Cornwall. This year, on both sides of the Atlantic, we remember those men and the countless others and their families who lived and worked there as we celebrate the bicentennial of our remarkable shared mining heritage. We pick up our story after the party arrived at Real del Monte on the 10th of June. One of the Cornishmen, most likely Captain John Rule, wrote home to a friend in Cornwall describing their arrival and giving his thoughts on his new surroundings.
We were expected here as our coming had been announced in the Mexican newspapers long before we arrived. The people at our arrival evinced every demonstration of joy by ringing the bells, and a deputation of the priest and principal inhabitants of the place immediately waited on us. The Count Reglar, who is lord of the mines, also arrived within a few hours after us, and with whom we had the honour to dine, and at whose house we at present live. Here is a very fine climate, not at all hotter than in England. The town or village is situated on very elevated land at the foot of 2 hillocks, with a southern aspect. It contains about 1,500 people, and will soon be restored to its wonted splendour.
However, Ald's diary paints a rather less rosy picture.
June the 10th. At noon we made our solemn and triumphal entry into Real del Monte, or into the place where Real del Monte once existed, and where it will ere long raise its head again. I say once existed, because it has now the air of a village sacked by a horde of Cossacks, or of something yet more desolate. The tempus edax of the poets has here used his scythe with inexorable cruelty. The roofs are perforated and falling in, the walls crumbling down, and in short the whole village converted into a mass of ruins. The 2 or 3 habitations which are thought the best are scarcely habitable. We may therefore bid goodbye to comforts. The causes of this decay are obvious enough. This district has no resources when the mines are not worked, which has been the case at Real del Monte for a long time past. We were received with ringing of bells, and lodged in the house of the Count de Regla, which was a little better than the others. The people thronged to the church, and put up sincere and fervent prayers for the success of our undertaking. Before an hour had elapsed, the Sacri Bronzi resounded afresh in honour of the Count himself. The news of our arrival had flown to San Javier, where he then was staying. For want of beds, we continued to sleep stretched on the ground, and wrapped each in his mantle, except 2 of our party who set up their camp beds. June 11th. We could bear the cold no longer, and were obliged to fortify ourselves in our winter clothes against the climate of the torrid zone. The Count de Regla insisted on our whole company going today to his country house. It was, however, determined that only 4 should enjoy this pleasure, and I had the good fortune to be del bel numero uno. The Count's country house is called the Hacienda de San Miguel. Before dinner we walked in a delightful little grove, where there was a beautiful display of fountains and jets d'eau. June 12th. We visited the Hacienda de Beneficio near to the mines, that of Regla, of Sant Antonio, and of San Miguel, adjoining the Count's house. The buildings upon them must have cost immense sums, but they are now in a state of decay, though not difficult to repair. They are ill-planned and appear placed at random. The architect, whoever he was a sworn enemy of right lines and angles. June 13th. We returned to Real del Monte, and proceeded to Pachuca, where we dined in another house belonging to the Count. Pachuca is distant only 1.5 leagues from the rail, but totally different as to climate. It is considerably less cold. It rains frequently, I might almost say daily, at the Real, while it's perfectly fair at Pachuca. The white houses with terraces on the roofs give it the air of a Turkish village. It has 2 or 3 churches of considerable size, and 2 large monasteries. The Count conducted us to the best of the 2, which was built by his father. In this dwell, in holy ease, 20 Franciscan friars, who can look back to the good times when there were 200. We were told to enter on tiptoe, as the Reverend Fathers were sleeping after their dinner, and we were not to disturb them. In the afternoon, we took leave of those of our party who were going to Mexico, and returned to Real del Monte, after launching them in an immense carriage faithfully copied from one of the first of the 500 originally brought from Spain.
Taylor instructed Vetch to lose no time in securing the purchase of the leases to work the various mines in Real del Monte and elsewhere from the 3rd Conde de Regla, who drove a hard bargain and was paid handsomely. He continued to derive a fortune from the payment of annual rent for the 21-year duration of the leases. The lease of the Mina Moran was purchased from Thomas Murphy, who profited in the same manner. Over the course of the next 12 months, the party was kept busy surveying the mines. They repaired and retimbered numerous shafts, including those at Acosta, Dolores, Guadalupe, Sacramento, San Cayetano, San Jose, San Juan, and Santa Teresa, and the main adit was rehabilitated. 3 houses in the village were purchased by the company to provide accommodation for the immediate needs of the Cornishmen. A house behind the church became the Casa Grande, the mine office. This was rebuilt with English fireplaces and chimneys, and housing and industrial stores were built at San Cayetano and San Ramon, all of which gave the town a distinctly Cornish character. The ruinous amalgamation works at San Miguel Regla near Huasca were repaired, and metalled roads were created to link the amalgamation works to the main mines of the Vita Vizcaína. The road between Real del Monte and Huasca is still in use. Accommodation also had to be provided in preparation for many more recruits who were on their way from England in 4 ships with a huge consignment of mining machinery, including 9 steam engines. This machinery arrived off the Mexican coast in the spring of 1825, and its journey inland to the mines is a tale of tragedy and triumph. This story will be told in a future film as we commemorate this great feat in 2025. John Taylor had also instructed Vetch to push ahead in securing leases for the Bolaños Mining Company, a sister enterprise to the Real del Monte, set up to work mines further north in the states of Jalisco and Zacatecas. The life of the Real del Monte Company was almost cut short when, in the spring of 1825, a dispute between one of the major shareholders and Taylor was heard before the Court of Chancery regarding the legality of its working the Bolaños mines, which threatened the partnership and which might have led to the dissolution of the Real del Monte Mining Company. We will now attempt to trace the fate of the British men who arrived in the Party of 15 in 1824. Some of their stories are well known, others have never been told. We begin with Robert Ogilvy Auld. He was employed as an assistant commissioner and was soon dispatched to the old colonial mining centre of Bolaños in the state of Jalisco, charged with the task of securing new leases of mines in the Sierra Madre Occidental. By the end of 1825, he had secured 3 important contracts for leasing the mines of Concepcion, Tepec and Intermedio, as well as 2 haciendas. However, Bolaños was remote, exceedingly hot and unhealthy, ravaged by periodic visitations of cholera and typhoid, and labour was scarce. In order to reward young Auld, Vetch increased his wage to £400 per annum, but as at Real del Monte, Vetch managed to upset and alienate the Cornish management there. In order to retain Auld's services, in the autumn of 1827, Vetch's successor, Commissioner Charles Tyndall, offered to make Auld the commissioner of the Bolaños mines. Auld was then at the Zacatecas mines held by the company and was due to travel to England to advise the board of directors whether or not to relinquish their lease of the Vita Grande mine. He would not be returning to Mexico until the summer of 1828. Auld went back to Mexico and had returned to Britain from Zacatecas before 1834, when in September he married in London. He returned to Mexico with his wife, who gave birth to a stillborn daughter at the mining town of Guadalupe Calvo in Chihuahua in March 1839. In 1842, Auld set up a company there with John Hitchcock Buchan, his brother-in-law, who had arrived in Mexico in 1825 with the Real del Monte Transport Party. Buchan was to serve as the managing director of the Real del Monte Company when the Mexicans took over in 1848. Auld died in his 41st year on the 30th of October 1846 at the mining town of Guaynacebe in Durango. He had written a letter about Indian corn to the Glasgow Courier from there only 2 months before his death. The Auld family continued to have a close involvement with the Real del Monte mines. In 1856, Robert's brother, Thomas Reed Auld, took over as managing director from Robert's brother-in-law, John Hitchcock Buchan. James Vetch, whom John Taylor knew from being the secretary of the Royal Geological Society, spoke Spanish and had a keen interest in geology. Taylor expected Vetch's military background would ensure the smooth running of the company at Real del Monte. He soon found out that this was not to be the case. Vetch clashed badly with his head agent John Rule over the development of the mines and antagonised the Cornish miners who resented his strict regimentation. Vetch grumbled to Taylor that the Cornish were fiercely independent and difficult to manage, and not very sober or industrious. Vetch soon found himself caught between the demands of Taylor in London and the realities of trying to plant a foreign system of mining into a region with an industry equally as proud as that in Cornwall. Taylor pressed him hard to expand the company's interests, to prevent rival companies from gaining a foothold in the region, and to consolidate the holdings of the Bolaños Company too. Unsurprisingly, Vetch fell foul of the Mexican miners, whom he viewed as lazy, obstinate and prone to thievery. They were enraged when in 1827 he suspended the customary partido system of payment, whereby the men received part of their payment in silver ore. There were riots, the Cornish mine workers were threatened with death, and Vetch was forced to call in troops to quell the discontent. He fell ill with rheumatic fever in the autumn of 1825, burdened with the logistical nightmare of getting the men and machinery that had arrived off Vera Cruz inland to the mines, as well as dealing with matters further afield at Bolaños and Zacatecas. In 1827, he was replaced as commissioner by Charles Tyndall. He then moved north in Mexico and gave his services to rival British-backed companies, the Anglo-Mexican Mining Association and later the United Mexican Mining Association, both of which had interests in the Guanajuato area. In 1829 he returned to Britain and in 1832 married Robert Auld's sister. He returned to Mexico with his wife, who was delivered of a son at Guanajuato in May 1833. Vetch remained in Mexico until 1835, after which time he returned to Britain, where he worked on numerous engineering projects. He died in December 1869 and was interred in a family vault in Highgate Cemetery, London. John Rule spent 1 year at Real del Monte overseeing the rehabilitation of the abandoned mines and processing mills and building roads to connect them. His task was no easy one, and his health suffered from the stress of dealing with the expectations of the company's chief commissioner Vetch and the independent-minded and fractious band of Cornishmen who resented Vetch's interference and rules. His poor relationship with Vetch caused him to tender his resignation and return to Camborne in October 1825 on the grounds of ill health. During this time he remarried. His first wife had died in 1818. In 1834 he was persuaded to return to Real del Monte as head agent with the company. He and his wife resided in the Casa Grande near the church in Real del Monte. Here he lived through the perilous years of turbulence under Santa Anna, when he was obliged to have armed guards posted on the roof of his home, which contained the company's safe, to prevent the theft of its contents. He faced numerous challenges during those rebellious years, including getting the silver to Mexico City and the payroll back to Real del Monte due to the presence of bandits on the highway. He managed to resist the Mexican miners' demands and threats for higher wages, but was constantly under pressure caused by the theft of the company's silver and materials, and even the fear of conscription of his workforce into the Mexican army in 1834. In May 1836, he and his wife returned to Cornwall for a much-deserved break, leaving his half-brother, William Bennett Rule, in charge as head agent. In 1836, he was promoted to the position of Chief Commissioner following the failure of his predecessor Tyndall. "I have come to an empty house, not a dollar in the chest," was his response to the state of the company he was charged to manage. He presided over an enterprise that achieved variable success, due in part to his narrow focus on developing the Vita Viscaina while ignoring the potential of other mineral lodes, which later proved to be incredibly rich. Following several years of failing health, in 1843 he resigned his post and returned to Cornwall, where he and his wife settled at Park Bracket House, Camborne. Known locally as Mexico Rule, he died at Park Bracket in May 1866, aged 83. One of his lasting legacies was his negotiation in 1825 with British consul Charles O'Gorman and the state governor of Mexico for a 20-acre plot of ground at the Cerro del Judío above Real del Monte for Protestant burials, which is now known as the English Cemetery. This beautifully maintained burial ground contains the graves of hundreds of Cornish exiles and their descendants. William Simmons was contracted to be the chief cashier of the Real del Monte Mining Company. During his illness in the autumn of 1825, Vetch entrusted him to give a true account of the company's affairs to John Taylor. He was scathing about his fellow Cornishmen, and not only the lower classes, for he was highly critical of John Rule too. They clashed bitterly over the development of the Vita Viscaina. He had little good to say about the Mexican miners either. Simmons advised patience with the company's development of the mines and was optimistic about their future, although he cautioned against pressing ahead with any additional holdings. In 1833, he seems to have been dispatched to the Bolaños mines in the state of Jalisco, which entailed a journey of at least 26 days through exceedingly rough country. A notice in the Royal Cornwall Gazette stated that he died in February 1833 at the Real del Monte mines, but a family memorial inside Gwenep Church notes that it occurred at San Jacinto on the 23rd of April 1833. San Jacinto is to the south of Bolaños. Given the number of deaths of the mining workforce which had been decimated by cholera at Bolaños in 1833, suggests that he too might have succumbed to this disease. John Morecambe came from a family who had been connected with mining for generations. Originally from St Austell, the Morecambes settled at Whitehall and Gwenep. John's appointment with the Real del Monte Mining Company at the tender age of 19 launched an illustrious overseas mining career that lasted over 7 decades and spanned the globe. Vetch took an instant liking to Captain Morecambe. Unlike many of the recalcitrant Cornishmen working at Real del Monte, Morecambe was noted to have been working well with the heads of department. In 1825, Vetch was so pleased with his performance and good qualities that he had appointed him manager with special responsibilities for developing the Viscaina vein. After the chaos caused when Vetch suspended the Partido and called in the troops to quell the subsequent disturbance, Morecambe assisted him to introduce the Cornish tribute system. In 1835, he was working as a mining captain at Bolaños. He was still there in 1837, but sometime after this he appears to have left Mexico. He obviously made a good impression on John Taylor too, for when he left Mexico, he continued to be employed by John Taylor and Sons until his death. In his capacity as a mining inspector, he visited mines in Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Brazil, Uruguay, Venezuela, British Guiana, Nicaragua, Turkey, India, New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia and New Zealand, and every state of the Union in which mining was carried on. For years he managed mines in different parts of Spain, including the famous Linares lead mines, and travelled much on the continent. His last trip was to New Zealand, from whence he returned in January 1900 in ill health. Noted to have been a prominent Wesleyan Methodist, he died in May 1900. Vetch soon dispatched Captain John Daly to mines being worked by the Bolaños Mining Company at Zacatecas. He was given charge of the entire underground operations of the Veta Grande mine, and it was under his management that a great discovery of ore was made at the Galega mine, which completely turned the company's fortunes in Zacatecas around. He was afterwards in the service of the Anglo-Mexican Mining Company. He then went to work at the Santa Ana gold mines in Colombia for the Colombian Mining Association. In 1830, he was back in Cornwall and resident at Redruth, acting as a recruiting agent for the newly formed St John del Rey Mining Company. He then travelled to Brazil and advised the company that the Morro Velho mine was likely to be a profitable concern. The mine was secured by the company and became one of the greatest gold mines in the world. Daly became its chief mining engineer. He then migrated to Australia, where he inspected properties in the Victorian goldfields at Burra Burra in South Australia and near Yass in New South Wales. He returned home to Cornwall in 1853, where he took up residence at Sedgemoor Terrace, St Austell. He acted as the consulting engineer to a Brazilian gold mining company and as a recruiting agent for various overseas enterprises. He died at Bodmin Road, St Austell, aged 74, in 1873. Commissioner Vetch soon found himself short of hands to develop the Real del Monte mines, and by late 1825 he had been forced to recruit men by word of mouth. Blacksmith John Glasson suggested that he send for his father John and younger brother Jackie, both of whom were blacksmiths. Vetch preferred younger men, so he accepted his brother, who joined him in Mexico. Here is clear evidence of the role that family links were to play in the migration of the Cornish to Real del Monte and Pachuca, most of which was via word of mouth and personal recommendations. Both men saw out their 3-year contracts and returned home to Lalante, where they soon married. Once back at home, John decided to diversify, and he opened the only public house between St Ives and Carber Spray at Trelawyan, the Cornish Arms. John and his wife had no children. He was declared bankrupt in 1863, but he somehow managed to hold on to his business. On his death in 1870, his brother Jackie, who had continued to work as a blacksmith resident at nearby Hallstown, took over the pub. It remained in the Glasson family until Jackie's death in 1893. We hear in 1825 that John Penberthy had been dispatched by Vetch to the Mina Vita Grande, located north of the city of Zacatecas and under the management of the Bolaños Mining Company. Penberthy might also have been from the Levant area, although without further research this is presently pure conjecture. If he was from Levant, he returned to Cornwall where he married in 1833 and later migrated with his family to the upper Midwest of the United States. It is possible that John Penberthy's older brother Isaac joined him at the Royal del Monte mines, working a 3-year contract with the company as a mining captain, before he too returned to Cornwall. It is interesting that in 1841, Jackie Glasson and Captain Isaac Penberthy lived close to each other in the mining village of Hallstown. Samuel Hocking, born in the shadow of Carnbray, was the youngest in the party, a mere boy, whom his parents entrusted to the care of Captain John Rule. He had been impressed by improvements the boy had made to the ventilating apparatus he was working at Dulcoath. It is a testament to Rule's character that when the lad returned to Cornwall in 1828, he placed him with the celebrated Camborne engineer Arthur Wolfe to learn mechanical engineering. In doing so, Rule launched what was to become a glittering career for Hocking, who made rapid progress. He superintended the erection of a number of engines under the Copperhouse Company, where he was employed in the fitting shop. Between 1836 and 1843, he had charge of the first works at the Clifton Suspension Bridge. This scheme failed, and the chains were bought by the company formed for the erection of the Hungerford Suspension Bridge, and Hocking, as agent for the Hale Copperhouse Company, superintended the work across the Thames. He also superintended the erection of pumping engines at the waterworks of Old Ford, Brentford, Battersea, Croydon and Leek in Staffordshire. On the closing of the Copperhouse foundry, Hocking's services were secured by the well-known safety fuse manufacturers, Messrs Bickford Smith and Davy, for whom he reconstructed and improved the machinery at the Tucking Mill Works. He also designed and superintended the erection of all the machinery in the manufactories established by this firm in Lancashire, France, Spain and America. He died suddenly at Rosewarne in Cornwall in 1877. Nothing has been discovered of the fate of the miner named Allen, and the 9th Cornishman in the party was never identified in the records. The British continued to run the Real del Monte Mining Company until the late 1840s. Throughout that decade, expenditure had exceeded revenue, and the mines were sold to Mexican capitalists in 1848. Taylor's venture has been condemned as a failure, but the British succeeded in successfully transplanting the machinery of the Industrial Revolution to Real del Monte Pachuca, which enabled the flooded mines to be rehabilitated. The Mexican company kept faith with steam technology, importing numerous engines from Cornwall, which allowed the further expansion of mining in the district. The Mexicans also kept faith with the Cornish, who were the aristocracy of labour, occupying the best-paid positions in the newly formed Real del Monte and Pachuca Mining Company. They and their machinery dominated the district into the next century. Many Cornishmen branched out and set up successful mining companies of their own, including most famously Frank Rule of Troon, who made so much money that he was known as El Rey de la Plata. Numerous Cornish families and community organisations were grateful for the remittances that flowed home from the men working at the mines throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. The legacy of the Cornish remains strong in the district and can be seen in the vernacular buildings, Cornish-type engine houses, Methodist places of worship, the English cemetery, love of football, family names and most famously, pasties. The area is known as Mexico's Little Cornwall, and its tangible and intangible heritage is recognised as of great significance to the Cornish Mining World Heritage Site. The ties that bind our two nations together were recognised in 2008 with the signing of a friendship agreement between Camborne and Pachuca, and with Redruth twinning with Real del Monte. In this bicentennial year, we remember and celebrate the links of technology and culture, of kinship and friendship, as we continue to write a new chapter in our remarkable shared heritage.